It is said that a great fire broke out in a women's bathhouse in Ottoman Egypt. Due to the fire, the women in the bathhouse split into two groups. The first one rushed outside without their clothes, while the other group preferred to die burning rather than exposing themselves bare before the public. As the fire raged, people crowded in front of the burning bathhouse. A passerby asked, "What happened?" One of the crowd replied, "Those who had shame have died." That phrase became an Egyptian proverb used in every situation where people lose their sense of shame. They boast and reproach others for the very misguidance they themselves are upon. And today, in a world dominated by the West by force, wealth, and the lie of civilization and progress, we face many accusations that they hurl at our Muslim societies, while they are the ones most guilty of them. So setting aside flowery speeches and elegiac words, let us discover what reality tells us about this civilization of contradictions and what the numbers tell us about those who have no shame. The accused and the criminal. In June of 2016, the former German Minister of Justice Heiko Maas announced his country's intention to renew the laws of child marriage and polygamy, not for the Germans, but for migrants whose faith permits this type of marriage. Before adding, "No newcomer has the right to place his cultural roots or his faith above our laws." And in the year 2020, French Minister Marlène Schiappa made a similar statement on the French channel BFM TV, considering polygamy contrary to the values of the French Republic. So let us take a look at these Western values that scorn what Allah made lawful for his servants and see it as a means of corruption that deserves years of imprisonment. In our Islamic framework that angers the enlightened Westerner, we find that Allah permitted polygamy for men who fear falling into temptation, but at the same time, he restrained their desire with a moral and ethical bridle that obligates him to marriage responsibilities and justice among wives, along with many other conditions, too many to expand upon here. But if we were to look at the value system that governs the West that criticizes us, we would find ourselves before something that could be described by anything but a system. In a statistical study about the sexual behavior of British citizens, it was found that the average number of sexual partners for a man between the ages of 25 and 35 was 3.5 ages of 16, and 44 was 11.7 sexual partners. While for women, the average in the same age range was 7.7 sexual partners. As for Germany, a study in the German medical journal Deutsches Ärzteblatt showed that the average number of women a German man has sexual relations with in his lifetime is 10 women, while the number of men a woman has relations with is 5 men. And this is also the case in the United States, obviously, where the average number of sexual partners according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, was about 6 for men and around 4 for women. Considering these statistics, in countries that do not recognize or permit polygamy, can we ask about the type of these relationships in which this massive sexual multiplicity occurs, or rather, about its consequences? Let us now turn to a survey conducted in 2016, which found that 43% of children born in the European Union are illegitimate children. In the terminology of the civilized world, children born out of wedlock. This rate is slightly higher than its counterpart in the United States, which recorded illegitimate children at 40%. And a similar rate appears in another survey, which points to the number of high school students who had engaged in sexual intercourse at least once. And because of this deviant sexual behavior, young people aged 18 to 25 now hold the elephant's share of sexually transmitted diseases every year, accounting for 50% of the total infected age groups. So which group is more deserving of the sexual label? Those who follow their instinct within moral and ethical limits that preserve people's rights and elevate them above the level of animals, or those who placed animals in ranks above themselves, and even more so, the ailing doctor. In an episode of the talk show, #ShababTalk, discussion revolved around women's freedom in countries across the world. There appeared the German-Lebanese director Imad Karim, who accused Muslim countries of having the highest rates of harassment and discrimination against women in the world. And although the show carried a biased agenda against Islamic values, the host could only respond with a simple logical question to follow up on his guest's claim, "Is there a source for that?" The guest stammered and could not provide a single source to support his flimsy words. So let us offer him many sources that may push him to retire from public life altogether. And let us go directly to a special report on the ranking of the countries most abusive towards women to find that the top 10 list is completely void of any Islamic country. Rather, it includes so-called advanced civilized countries like Canada, Australia, and Sweden, where nearly a quarter of its women are raped. Turning to the United States, we face a frightening tally which tells us that 60% of women have been subjected to sexual harassment at least once in their lives. However, the journey back to Europe will place us before other countries that claim to uphold women's values, while in reality, they witness disasters against women like Germany, where police reports are filled with nearly 20,000 cases of rape in just 2019 and 2020 alone. Rates of harassment against women reach 45%, which is close to Britain, where half the women in 2021 were subjected to harassment in one form or another, placing it below Sweden, where 66% of its women suffered from this vile act. As for France, it recorded in 2019 more than 20,000 cases of rape in the following 2 years. The percentage rose by 32% and 33% respectively, with total cases exceeding 75,000. And the harassment rates in France came with numbers impossible to keep up with, as a government report admitted that 100% of women in Paris have been subjected to harassment and sexual abuse on public transportation. So what greater violation than this could happen to women in the City of Light? And is this the woman they boast of protecting and demanded to liberate from the backwardness of our societies, which they describe as sexually repressed? Or is it yet another contradiction of the sick Western doctor who runs after us with his medicine while he is the first of its patients in the ward of hopeless cases? But let us not lose hope. Perhaps we may find his innocence in other freedoms, far from women's freedom. Double standard. In May of the year 2022 AD, the French Football League announced a round to support those of the six colors, and because the Senegalese player Idrissa Gueye was a Muslim who did not believe in the legitimacy of this, he excused himself from participating in this round for personal reasons. However, the Ethics Committee of the French Football Federation attacked the player and demanded that he apologize publicly for possible refusal to support those mentioned. Rather, they even demanded, with sheer insolence and audacity, that he post a picture on his accounts while holding the shirt colored with the hues of deviation. Here we may ask, where then is freedom in the so-called land of liberties? It answers, they may say, freedom does indeed exist. You may draw offensive cartoons mocking the greatest man in the history of mankind and violate the sanctities of 2 billion people, not to mention offending the largest religious minority in France itself, without anyone harming you for criticizing Islam and insulting its sacred symbols, is freedom of expression, and we are a democratic country. But if you refuse to wear a sports jersey and quietly excuse yourself from a match, then this is called incitement to hatred, and that is something that violates your freedom and strips you of any right to expression. And speaking of hate claims, we find the same thing in larger matters that concern blood and lives, in which it seems that the Western gentleman carries two different standards of measurement. For in the context of sports itself, we can see the Zionist players representing their entity in various sports arenas, while their army is carrying out the largest ethnic cleansing in modern history. Why? Because, of course, sports do not mix with politics. But at the same time, we will notice that Russia's national teams and its athletes and clubs are banned from any sporting participation because of its assault on Ukraine, even though Russia itself hosted the World Cup in 2018 at the very time when its weapons were inflicting terrible torment upon the Syrians. And regardless of sports bias, we will find a childish kind of non-standard bias manifested in the University of Milan, which banned the study of Russian literature in solidarity with Ukraine, as though Dostoevsky were the one who loaded the planes and Tolstoy the one who dropped the bombs on Ukrainian civilians. This was at the same time when major Western brands announced their boycott of Russia and the closure of their branches there. But this legitimate boycott could have become a criminal act if it was upon the butchers of the illegitimate entity. In 2019, the German city of Aachen threatened to withdraw its prize from the Lebanese artist Walid Rad because he supports one of the boycott campaigns against the entity, or rather, for not condemning it. Meanwhile, its neighbor Dortmund actually carried out the threat when it withdrew a prize from the British-Pakistani writer Kamila Shamsi because she supported the BDS movement, which also boycotts the entity. But if you want a bigger scandal about the duplicity of Western freedom, you can see it in the investigation conducted by the German Foreign Ministry against its envoy to the occupying entity, just because he liked tweets critical of it. And speaking of the likes, we can notice the growing Facebook suppression of any content related to our just cause, while the content supportive of the entity roams freely across its pages without restriction. For during the latest aggression alone, Facebook deleted about 800,000 posts and accounts that supported the oppressed side. Even major pages, like the page of Quds News Network, were swept away, and the number of subscribers did not save it, which exceeded 10 million. Because the standards of the Western community did not permit this discourse. Alongside all this, we observe a new feature of the crude contradictions of Western civilization. It throws accusations at us, while placing itself in the seat of the judge, even though they are the killers, the thieves, and the violators. And thus true is the saying, those who had shame have died.